quite a complete program about wood turning today, because I was said some turners here may be new in the field. So I like, as I did always offer 3 levels of workshops, and I always want people to make the basic wood turning class before the other one, whichever is the order after. And these 3 levels for me are side grain turning, spindle turning. That is the basic. And I know that most people are not intended to do a lot of spindle turning. They want to turn ball or end grain, but not really spindle. That is now the field of industrial turning. Despite this fact, spindle turning for me is not, as people think, the easiest approach. Turning a bowl is way easier than turning a spindle properly. And learning to turn a spindle properly obliges you to control the coordination of the 3 movements of a wood turning tool, and that is capital for any wood turning you will do. So I will go across all basic principle of wood turning, but most of those will apply as well to any woodworking. And so I will be take quite a long time to make this theory, because these basics will help you solve any problem you will meet on the lathe later. I'm not the one who teach to make Lipton soup. I like to teach cooking. And most people will say, you do it like that. But if you don't know why, it doesn't help you in a different situation. If you know the why of how, you will be able to find the solution to any problem you will meet. So that will take quite some time for the theory. And as I did offer to cover the 3 approaches of wood turning: spindle turning, cross grain is ball turning, and as well end grain turning. That is my specialty, and that is far away the most complicated approach to wood turning, for a very simple reason. If you want to do a proper cut into end grain, you must cut from the bottom out. And that means you have to cut backward. And all wood turning tools are designed to go forward. So for years I have developed a technique that I basically picked up from Richard Raffin. Richard Raffin, I saw Richard Raffin in '83, I think, in Ottawa. And it's the first time I ever saw another wood turner turning. But he was doing a presentation in Ottawa, and I was there for the presentation. And I saw him doing the uppercut in his little cups that he makes for, you know, flour or rice or whatever. You know, he always did that on the demonstration, turning a small cup that he cut with a bensa. It's like a small goblet with a stem, and he cut it on the bensa. It makes a little shovel, you know. So this little cup, just as a technical thing, he just hollow it inside with a spindle gouge. And it's very fast. He goes inside, you know, a spindle gouge is a drill, you know. So he makes the pilot hole, and then just make a couple movement like that, and the cup is empty. It's really fast. And you can also use this technique to make hollow turning. Because when you make hollow turning, if you use a scraper, as soon as you touch inside, it's full of shaving. You're stuck. If you use this technique, your shavings are coming out in the flute of the gouge. It's very amazing. I mean, in a minute, you can hollow this out with a spindle gouge and not having to stop. You don't scrape dust, you cut shavings, and the shavings are flowing out, boom, in the flute. It's very amazing. So I thought that was fairly amazing technique. And later, when I was always looking for, most of my turning in production were end grain. Kitchen mortars, wine goblets, flower vases. Later I did lampshades and djembe and so on with the hook tool. And so most of my turning was end grain. So I was always looking for good cutting techniques in end grain. So I started messing with this uppercut of Richard Raffin. And Richard is using the rim of the bowl as a support for his gouge. A spindle gouge is very acute, basically. in opposition to a bowl gouge that is fairly obtuse. So he was using the spindle gouge, and he could not rely on the bevel, as we should do, but he was relying on the rim of the small bowl to hollow, to cut with the spindle gouge, because it's too acute to rely on the bevel, on the heel of the, how you call it? Le biseau. The sharpening surface, how you call it?
The bubble. The bubble.
The bevel?
No, the edge. They call it an edge.
I mean, you got the cutting edge, the bevel, and the heel. Okay, the heel. So you cannot rely on the heel because it's too acute. So, but he does use the technique, it works, but only under a small diameter. You can use that technique on large diameter. But I started doing that, and then I realized if you use a bowl gouge, and I modified the bowl gouge, I've been improving the shape of a side ground bowl gouge that basically is Irish grind. The first ever turners to use this type of sharpening were the Irish guy, and for many years it was called the Irish grind. So instead of having a 45-degree side wing on a bowl gouge, they were grinding further back. And I started from there, but I quite elongated it and straightened it. The Irish grind basically is more convex of a cutting wing. Mine is very lightly convex and very long, and it ends along with the gouge itself. So I got gouges here to show you. Oh, I forgot my samples. Okay. Always have to forget something. So I started developing the uppercut, that is Richard Raffin way to design this type of turning with a bowl gouge, but not relying on the rim, relying on the bevel. And that becomes extremely tricky because the bevel is on a bowl gouge, the way I grind it is very obtuse. It is 65 degrees, in fact. So making a pressure on the cutting edge with a 65, pressing on the heel to make the pressure there, I mean, you need 10 pounds here to make one there. If you go there, you got any pressure you make there, won't make any pressure here, but it's geometrical combination, you know. If you're 45 degree, 2 pounds give you one there. If you're 65, you need almost 10 pounds there to have one there. So you must control the pressure on your cutting edge, pushing on the heel. I'll show you this technique later when I get to the end grain turning. But all of that to say that end grain turning is very tricky. So I've been developing this grind to make mostly wine goblets I was doing at that time. And I have making translucent wine goblets. I started dreaming of making lampshades. But it was not possible with this technique. The uppercut with a side ground bowl gouge, as I tell you, is a very, very tricky technique, but you cannot extend it to large diameter because it would require too much pressure. You can, basically, it's comfortable until 3-inch diameter, 3-inch deep, but it's extremely fast technique. You can enlarge the dimension, but it becomes quite tricky. You've got to master very well the cut. And then I started dreaming of a tool that would truly works backward, because the uppercut with the side ground bowl gouge is working from bottom out instead of working from the rim to the bottom in an end grain turning. So it's for 3 years I was dreaming at night of cutting edges in a proper shape to work backward. And they were always more and more grabby. So I was waking up. Whoa, okay, I was just dreaming. You got a major catch and you got a major accident. I was happy, I was just dreaming. And all of a sudden I started realizing after many, many years of dreaming about this tool, that if I want to have a controllable cut on this bend tool, I must bring back all cutting edges in the alignment of your hand and the tool rest. So a lever, a rod to lift something, a leverage, a rod, First, must be longer on your side than the other side, otherwise you gain nothing. Second, it must be straight. If it's bent, you will never be able to lift. It will always turn down when you want to lift. So this is what happened with the cutting edge. And this is the problem with the ring tools. The standard ring tool or the traditional hook tools, you can only work with the tip of the ring or the hook because this part is aligned. As soon as you work with the side cutter here, it will turn and self-track in the wood. It becomes self-tracking. You cannot control it on the actual movement. You don't have a lot of force on the actual movement. It's very subtle, but you cannot force. On this angle on the tip, you have a lot of control because you have the whole length. In order to cut 1 millimeter thick, you must lift the handle 2-3 inches. So you have a very good control. But on the side wing, you have no control, and it will be self-dragging. A ring tool, you use the tip, you never use the side. That means you have to swing back to make the side wall in order to keep cutting with the tip. Most people start with a ring tool. Wow, it's fantastic, it cuts clean, it cuts easy. When you get on the side, if you don't move back, you start cutting with the side of the cutter and then it drags in and you have a major catch. It's really violent. I broke my cheek. First time! Broke the cheek doing that, so I can tell you. So the Martel hook tool was, as I said many years after, people telling me, how you can pretend having patented the hook tool. The hook tool exists for 1,000 years. Right. I haven't invented the bicycle. I just did put the steering on. Before, you give a ride to your bicycle. When you put a steering, you can ride the bicycle. That's the difference. So the patent is on the elbow, it's not on the hook itself. So in order to bring all cutting edges back into the alignment of your hand, well, having a large size always is more evident. So the point here is aligned with the 2 points here. That's the alignment. If you are here, you are not in the alignment and you have no control. So the hook tool, in order to bring all cutting edges into the alignment, I first was bending the cutting part up, and it more out of the alignment, it was more grabby, and this is where I was waking up, all sweating, and fortunately I was just dreaming, but that one's not a good one. So I ended up breaking down the shaft, bend on the right-hand side, and bending back here in order to have the cutting edge from here to there, all inside the shank alignment. And that is the patent. And this is why the Martel hook tool never is self-dragging. You can control it with your fingertips, and you can change the cutting angle, rotating the handle. So the third movement of a wood turning tool, the two first one being vertical and lateral, the third one is axial. These three movements allow you to optimize your cut, whichever tool you use, in whichever situation you are, side grain, end grain, cross grain. There always is a way to find a proper shear cutting angle combining these movements. So this is the basic of wood turning. I like to talk about wood characteristic for people, because in wood turning, as soon as we turn big, we will turn green wood. You cannot draw a big piece of wood. If you want to know why, this is because of the shrinkage. And I like to explain how wood shrink, and that allow you to control better your wood turning after. So basically, you got 3 axes into a piece of wood. Longitudinal, radial, tangential, okay? This geometry, pure geometry. Cells in wood are like this. So when they are full of water, they are big. When they dry, they become very slim, but they don't reduce in length. This is why, longitudinally speaking, you will have from 1 to 3% shrinkage. The 2x4 doesn't reduce much in length. But you will have, on the radius here, you will have 3 to 7% shrinking. That's quite a bit. But on tangential here, you will have 7 to 15% shrinkage. I took many years to understand why does it shrink more tangential than radial. Because it's the same radius in the cell. Cell doesn't have, it's not flat, it's round. And I ended up understanding that you got about 5 to 10% cells that are radial in the wood. When you look at oak, quarter sawn oak, you see all these little flat cells. Those ones are flat, by the way, because they do travel in between the longitudinal cell. So they are radial cells. That brings sap, but mainly sugar, amido, starch.
Starch. Yeah.
And you know, any wood reserve to go across winter and start again in springtime. So these cells just carry material to the heart of the wood. But they exist, and there's about 5 to 10% of the cells that are radial. So these radial cells are not shrinking either. And that makes the difference in the radial shrinkage and the tangential. Because on the tangential plan, both cells are lateral. But on the radial, 10% are longitudinal. You understand what I mean? And this is why wood shrinks twice tangential than radial. As a result, when you do a table, for those who makes furniture, basically you should always put 2 pieces of wood reverse one after the other one. And when it dries or get wet, it will become like this, your table. But if you set them all on the same direction, the table just will do that when it dries. So you compensate. The smaller piece you have, the more straight it will remain. And this is because tangential is pulling way more than radial. So automatically, this piece will curve like this in drying. If you got a twisted tree, you got a board, the board will twist. Because the traction is stronger on one than the other direction, and it's not the same position all the way. So this is good to know, to understand, that your bowl, once it's turned, will be oval. This is longitudinal here. The bowl, you turn it round, but when it dries, it will become oval. A 24-inch diameter bowl may be 1.5 to 2 inches off diameter. Same thing on the side, your bowl will become like this. Because this here is tangential. If you turn your bowl like this, in the log, this is tangential. This pull the side, while this in tip here is radial. Doesn't pull as much. So the side of the bowl will be arced. And it may be absolutely gorgeous. Once I turned a bowl like that, that was really straight, you know, straight line. Not very deep. It was beach, I think. And I made the rim like this, you know. So it was very straight, very designed. Not that appealing. Once dry, it has a curve like that. It was fabulous. It was really nice. And I widely prefer an oval bowl to a round bowl. So I never, ever return a bowl. I turn it final thickness, leave it there, it will dry easily if it's even all the way. If it's 1.5 inch in the bottom and 1/2 inch on the rim, it probably would split because the rim will dry very fast and the bottom will take long to dry. Anyway, it will take longer because in the bottom you have long grain. Here it's very short. It dries from the end grain, not from the side grain. Your piece of wood there, if you want to dry it, it automatically, any dry wood would split. Poplar and willow will be easier to dry, but maple and oak, they automatically will split for a very simple reason. Both tips, even if you wax them, they will dry first. To dry the next cell, the first one must be completely dry. So the tips will dry, reduce, but inside this big log, you got a small one there that's all wet and didn't shrink. So the only possibility for the big outside cells are to split to compensate the shrinkage while the middle is not shrunk. So if you want to dry a piece of wood, make a hole in the middle. It will have two effects. First of all, it will dry both outside and inside. Second, it can shrink on the hole. Everybody now wants to have live edge, you know. So making slabs like this is very nice, but it's not possible to dry it. Because the outside is sap wood, that is the live part of the wood. In wood, this is sap wood, clear, white color, new cells, big, carry the sap. The sap flows up here and it flows down there under the bark. It goes up to the leaves, get loaded with photosynthesis, comes back with full load of sugar, amino starch, and so on, and give nutrients to underbark that is making the new annual ring. Wow. The heartwood is dark, it is dead wood. They are cells very, very small, very hard. On some wood, heartwood is way harder than sapwood. The harder is the wood, the bigger is the difference. Ebony is white, black. Maple is not that, very few woods here are dark in the heartwood, except walnut. But basically the harder is a wood, the stronger is the difference in hardness and in color between the sapwood and the heartwood. So the heartwood itself, it won't shrink that much either, because they are old cell, very lignified. Now, knowing these three different shrinkage percentage, you imagine you have a branch here. You have a 10-year-old branch into a 20-year-old trunk. So for 10 years you have straight grain. On the 11th year is a bud. And every year after, the grain will do that. Okay? That means if you turn this part here, on the side you have side grain, but where is the nut, you have along the grain. This is what will make it shrink with a big spout like that. It will be oval, but let's consider if there is a nut here. Where's the nut? It will stay there because it won't reduce in diameter. So if you want to make a small milk pot for your coffee, make it just under the branch. And it automatically will make the spout while drying. Knowing that, you can play with the shrinkage to make it shape the way you want to have it. So I like to explain that because it's very helpful as we mostly turn into greenwood. So I could talk along on wood because I like to classify wood. You have all very fine grain, maple, beech, all fruit trees are the finest grain and the hardest wood to dry. Plum probably is the hardest wood to dry. Okay, so wood type, mechanical and aesthetical concern. Aesthetical, all nut trees, oak, butternut, walnut, and walnut is not that characteristic of the nut trees, but hickories, beech nut, oak, all trees producing nuts have very strong character. You look at oak, you know, big cells, long cells, aesthetic, strong character, strong, lengthwise, hickory, handles. Why? Big, long cells, big tubes. Apple is a very hard wood. It would not make a good handle because the cells are very short, very fine. It's not structural. It's hard because it is so dense, but it would break easier. Even maple. Don't really make a handle with maple, although it's the best wood for floor. So it's good to know the character. For me, there is no good and bad wood. There are woods for different uses. I've been turning quite a bit of willow. That's the most rejected wood. You got a willow tree to cut, you pay a lot of money, and you pay a lot of money to the guy to take it out, because nobody want to have it. Makes the most wonderful sinks, and makes wonderful bowls. I've been turning 24-inch diameter bowl in willow. It's almost same color than cherry. It's not bad. It weighs nothing. You drop it on the floor, you will make a dent, but it will not split. You take a slab of willow. I had some that I did cut many years ago. There was a steel sheet over it. There was a hole in the steel sheet I didn't see. So after many years, I take it out, and the center was rotten. So it's stupid. I can't do anything with that. I tried to split it with an axe. You take a piece of maple, a slab, round, you know, not along the grain, cross grain. It's dry, drop it on concrete, it all split apart. Willow, I try to split it with an axe. I do my firewood for 45 years, and I split 30 cord a year, even elm sometime. So I know how to split wood, and I got good axes. And look! The axe drives this deep in the wood, and it doesn't split half an inch both sides of. In a short like this, I could never split it. It's like felt, you know. You can weave, you can knit, and you can felt. But willow is felted. It has no grain.
Yeah.
It's
just fibrous.
It's like felted wool. It's all direction. I mean, it's amazing. But it's beautiful. It's easy to turn, not hard to sand, and you have a large bowl that you hold like this. If it's maple, you hold like this, you know. So why not? Try it. It's fairly amazing. Wood structure, we've looked at it, grain direction, shrinkage, working with the grain. Whoa, that's a different story. Basic principle of a cutting tool, okay? Morphology of a wood cutting tool. I think I will start with the basic principles into woodworking, but same wood turning. There are amazingly, mostly always three different aspects of what I will explain. We have three approaches to wood turning. I tell you, side grain, cross grain. End grain is related to side grain, but I made those apart because when you turn spindle, you don't necessarily turn end grain. When you turn end grain, you automatically turn side grain, but the opposite is not right. When you turn cross grain, usually you turn both sides. You turn a bowl, you turn outside, inside, but both are cross grain. But end grain being way more complicated, I made it three different approaches to wood turning. So there are three movements, as I told you, on a wood turning tool. You have three possible movements that you must use the three of those in order to control, to optimize your cut. These three movements, as I told you before, are vertical, lateral, and axial. The axial movement is the less known and explained, but it is automatically used by most good wood turners with a little practice, but without realizing it. But it's important to realize how important it is in order to be able to apply it in different situations to get a better cut. So these, yes?
Sorry, Andre, can you use both, like attitude and turn at the same time?
You have to use three of those at the same time.
So you're lifting, turning, and
rolling.
turning the action?
Yes.
So all three at the same time?
You have to make the proper coordination of these three movements into most wood turning pass. A pass is you start your cut and you finish there. That's a pass. So doing a ball with a skew or a gouge is exactly the same movement. The skew will make a better job because it's finer edge, it's a straight edge, and it will allow a longer shearing of the cut along the cutting edge because it is straight, usually on a convex surface, as the gouge is a concave on a surface and the cutting point is narrow. So the skew will cut wider and offer a longer shearing, what makes a finer and a cleaner cut. Okay? So you must use in most movement. If I do cylinder, the tool got a parallel lateral movement. I'm not talking about the displacement of the cutting edge. I'm talking about the movement of the tool on itself. Okay? Lateral, not lateral. That's the lateral movement I'm talking about. The cutting edge, if I do a ball, it will go from the top down the center. That's 1 inch. But the tip here will make 2 feet movement to make 1 inch on the tip on a small ball like that, for example. Okay? And to make a ball, you must turn regularly vertical, lateral, and axial. The three must be very regular, and it's a ball. I will demonstrate making an egg. There will be more lateral movement at the end on the tip. But being elliptical, it won't be equal all the way. I will vary the proportion of each movement to have the elliptical shape in opposition to a ball. And that's what will make the optimal cut. So the three principles for a cutting tool on wood, whichever work you're doing, with a chisel, with a plane, with a carving tool, any cutting tool you will use on wood, first and basic principle is, that's the most important you must remember, is cutting with the grain. You must always cut a short grain that is supported by a longer one. That will make a clean cut. That will never make a clean cut because this grain is not supported in the back. If you want to cut it, it will bend and it will torn the grain. That is true for any woodworking technique. In carving, it's worse than ever. In turning, it's quite bad. Even with carbide tools that are they are not real cutting tool, but they do remove a lot of dust. They make dust, they don't make real shading. But even with a router, planer, you must cut with the grain. If you have a tabletop, you go around with your router, the router is turning this way. This will be clean. When you get here, it's turning this way. This will be very rough because the The cutter works against the grain. This will be clean, this will be rough, this will be clean. And there's no way to do otherwise. And you got the same situation when you turn a bowl. You got two-face rough, two-face clean, and the inside also, but the opposite. Because the grain is, with the grain is reversed. Okay? So this is the basic principle you must always respect. Second is to rub the bevel. This is a cutting tool. This is the hollow grind of a grinding wheel. That is quite important for me in wood turning. This is the cutting edge. This is the bevel here, and this is the heel. When you want to cut wood on the lathe or carving or whichever, you must rely on the bevel to control the depth of cut. The tool rest helps to position the tool, but you must rub the bevel, otherwise the tool will chatter because the tool rest is too far. If you work with a hand plane, the sewell is your bevel.
Isn't there a rule for that? The ABC, anchor, bevel, and cut?
Sorry?
The ABC, anchor, bevel, and cut.
Right. I like to say, you know, you find different examples for people to understand, because you tell people in a beginner class you must rub the bevel first. And what I like to say now for people to understand, when you walk, you rely on your heel, you put the point down, then you can find stabilize and change foot. You do it some 1,000 times a day without thinking about it. Do it on the lathe. After some time, you won't ever think about it. You just would put the bevel, find your cutting point, then go. They all go with the cutting edge. Too late to find the bevel. You just, okay? So, heel, point, action. Second principle, in carving, it's evident you cannot carve with your tool like that. You push on the heel and you put the handle down to lift the cutting edge, to make a curve. You will do the same on the lathe. Third principle, shearing. This is the direction of the wood. If I turn on a spindle, the grain is like that, but the wood runs 90 degrees with the grain on your tool. We talk about direction of the wood in the tool. Should be roughly 45 degrees with the cutting edge. I give you everyday example. Try to cut a tomato. You shear, it cuts. You don't, it splash. Try to cut bread. It's the same knife, same sharpening. Doesn't work? It works. Try to cut hay with a saw. A sound? Side. Why is it angled with the handle? 60 degrees. Shear cutting. When you cut, you don't cut like this. You cut like this. You have a side, it's 3 feet long. You cut maximum 3 inches. You have a very fine shear cutting, and it does cut. Try to cut 3 feet. It will never work. No shearing. Samurai. Sword. 3 feet long. Very few enemies have a 3 feet diameter neck. He will cut like this, a long shearing, for the benefit of both. He will just one strike, and the other one won't have to wait for the second. Makes a clean job. Right? So these 3 principles must apply all the time. That means you absolutely need the 3 movement coordination to keep your cutting edge 45 degrees all the time. You will see on the ball or the egg is the hardest to make in the beginning because you need a very wide lateral movement to keep your 45-degree angle. Otherwise, you start 45 if you want, you end up 0. It doesn't work. You cannot finish the point of your egg or your ball. You must move laterally. And that is the other thing I do insist more and more for many years. The main thing in wood turning is your body attitude, your body stance, your body position. You must have your feet apart. If you have your 2 feet close, you cannot move at all. You work only there. If you want to make a wide lateral movement, you must have a wider stand. You must have your knees on block. Somebody who's blocked like that, he cannot move. If I've got my knees on block, I straighten this one, I bend this one, I go there. I do the opposite, I go there. My upper body, my trunk remains straight. It is the mass on the tip of your tool that is stable. If I do that, I don't have, tricky, sharp movement. It's fluent. If I make a cylinder, nothing is moving excepting my knees. I'm moving laterally. If I want to make the curve, I will lift the handle, turn, and swing on my hips, right?
Yeah.
That will make the curve around the turning and the lateral movement. I remain very tight with my tool. If I work like that, I have no stability and my movement is not regular. Try to have a very supple movement on your legs. That's really true for any martial art, even painters. Even painters. I mean, if you want to turn something 6 inch long, and you have to do that, and move and do that, and move and do that. Try to make a circle in 4 shots. So this is very important. The body stance is absolutely capital. When I run beginner class, I said you take a roughing gouge is very simple to use because it has one angle all around in a position directly to my bowl gouge that is extremely variable from the tip to the side. This one is in the middle. Spindle gouge is in the middle. It's a little more acute on the side than on the tip. You don't grind it like that. You grind it like this. So there it's more obtuse, there it's more acute, and there it's more acute. So turning the tool, change the cutting angle. It also turns 90 degree with the cutting edge. As soon as I turn it a little bit, I got my 45-degree shear because the wing is going back.
Wider.
Well, this is on a bowl gouge. The average grind relates to a bowl gouge, but it's the same principle. Here, it's little off-center to turn. The Irish grind is quite off-center. You do that with the very grind. This is the idea of the very grind of one way that all in every wood turning company, tool company has copied. Nobody never reached half the efficiency of this one, and it's usually more expensive, but this is a real fantastic, it's a must. I mean, any wood turner has the very grind. I mean, it's a must in a wood turning kit. It's the first thing to get is the very grind. And I was refusing to sell. I'm very close to one way. They were supposed to do my tool in the beginning. I've been dealing with them for some years, and I even was working on the design of that lathe. I was dealing with them at the time they were producing the first lathe. Tim Clay is the owner. He was hassling me for many months. You must get my sharpening system, it's fabulous. I said, no, I want my students to be good at sharpening. Once they are good at sharpening, they are very good wood turners. And I'm right. The only problem is no hobbyist will never, no hobbyist will ever grind enough in his life to be good. You must do a lot of grinding before having a sturdy hand and knowing the shape and so on. Jean-François Escoulin, my friend, he's got a grinder on the wall, no tool rest, he's grinding like that, you know. And I can grind freehand too, and I've developed the side ground bowl gouge freehand for years. But Tim Clay badly imposed on me his grinding system against me. When I got it, I said, he's right, it's fabulous. So why losing the tool sharpening when you can turn with pleasure and grind your tool in second perfect every time? I mean, it's absolutely fabulous, this system. So all gouges I grind, any tool I grind with the system, but all gouges except the roughing out gouge is all the same angle. So I grind it directly in the V arm. It makes a perfect grinding. Spindle gouge, bowl gouge, in the very grind. I show you my recipe. There are thousands of recipes with this grinding system. To make my grinding, I find a way it makes a very good proportion and shape I like to use. And I give it to you, you do as you want after. You can use that or any other one, but I will tell you what is the combination to get the side ground bowl gouge. The Martel side ground bowl gouge, because every wood turner has his own shape on a tool. You know, Glenn Lucas, who turned mainly bowls, the bowl turners usually have 2, 3 different gouges to turn bowls. I turn bowls with one gouge. I'm not a specialist of bowls, so I do it all with one gouge. The same I use for the end grain. I got one grinding on a bowl gouge. Johannes Mikkelsen has a very different grind. Mine is concave. I use the convex of the wheel to make a concave bevel that allow me to hone my tool many times between 2 grindings. Americans all work with the burr, and I never understood until I demonstrated for 3-4 days beside Johannes Mikkelsen, and he was doing his hat, of course, on the mostly you must know Johannes Mikkelsen. He's the hat man, Joe Hat Man. So he was demonstrating in Austria. Aside me, we had each one lathe, and of course you're giving a show, you know, so you give a show. So we were just fighting, trying to bury next turner with the shaving. So we were turning, and you try just to shoot right on the hand, or on the face while he's turning. And he's quite an impressive wood turner for those who have seen Johannes. You give him a good piece of wood, a good chainsaw, he's got his tool in his pocket, and he cuts the wood, and you take more time to explain than to work. And 1.5 hours, the hat is finished. It's absolutely fabulous. So we were both demonstrating and explaining, because I do the same, as you can see, I explain a lot. And he was explaining the exact opposite I was. And we both were demonstrating we were right. So that's kind of bothering at a certain point, because I never did work with the burr on a tool. I always honed my tool. And I still have the first bowl gouge I bought in '75. But most American, the ones who make bowls, they buy 10 one-way bowl gouge a year. But they are always on the grinder on an 80 grit wheel. I grind on a 180 diamond that polishes, and I hone 10 times between. So my tools last and last and last. But then I understood why the burr is so efficient into cross grain. Into cross grain, the best cut you can get is with the burr. Because when you get against the grain twice a turn, either in or out, the very fine edge will slide underneath the grain and lift it, while the burr will act as a saw. It's rough. It reduces the torn grain into when you are against the grain. It won't be as clean with the grain, it will be less worst against. So the overall is way better. So that was a good point. Same thing with the angle of grinding. You work side grain, the longer bevel you have, the less resilience your tool has to cut. So the further is the limit of the strength you offer. A vibration is a misbalance between the force, the energy requested for a cut and the force available. The tool bend, the piece bend, the tool rest. If the effort is stronger than any piece involved, is a chattering. You back up because you cannot stand it. You back up, you cut less, you become stronger, you bounce. Chattering. Misbalance between energy request and force available. Automatically chattering. The sharper is your tool, the further is this limit. So a very fine edge will work better in side grain. It will also work better in end grain. But it will be a disaster in cross grain because this is side grain. We work with the grain. It's easy to see it will not work this way. The finer is your cutting edge, the better job. Inside, you can work like that. You will produce dust and a very rough surface. You quickly will be chattering too. So in an end grain, you must turn cut this way, inside. In cross grain, you must turn from bottom to the rim, opposite than side grain. If you work this way, you easily will work underneath the grain and lift the grain seriously. If you got an obtuse tip, it will go better because when you get there, this becomes along here. You imagine it quickly. I was turning bowls and I was sharpening my bowl gouge many years ago when I started turning. I was turning a lot of big bowls and I was sharpening my bowl gouge longer and longer to have an easier cut, you know. And it worked fine. All of a sudden, I had a bowl that lost 25% of the piece there. I couldn't believe it. It was working very well. All of a sudden, big piece of wood like this was removed from the bowl. All the side, imagine this is the top of the bowl, all this part here went out all at once. The fine cutting edge was getting underneath the grain, lifting, and instead of just turning the grain, it split the bowl. Very heavy. So this is why bowl gouges are way more obtuse. When you get there, your surface is not aligned with the grain as here. So it will not slide underneath the grain to split the wood. Okay? So this is why side grain and cross grain tools are totally different grindings and shapes.